All right, that makes us time. So, my name's Nick Randolph. I currently run a consulting company called Built Jerome here in Sydney, but I'm also part of the Uno platform core team, and that's part of the session today. Is we're going to talk about the Uno platform, but more importantly, we're going to talk about the components that we have for working with Figma and taking design through to code to try and improve that process of building apps. So just to gauge people's experience here, how many people have heard of the Uno platform? Okay, I'll give you a quick background of what we are and what we do. How many people have spent some time in Figma? More people. Okay, you probably spend more time in Figma than I have collectively. So if I run into issues, I'll call on the collective knowledge here to get me out of strife. So what is the Uno platform? So the Uno platform is a cross-platform technology. So it's an app development technology fundamentally at the core. So if you've heard of Maui, it's kind of like an equivalent of that. It is in the .NET space, but we target all of the platforms. So we do web, so WASM, we do mobile, we do desktop, we do embedded if you want to go that direction. But the idea is that you can take a single set of source code and build an app for all of these different platforms. You can build it on any OS. So if you happen to be working on Mac, you can build it using what was VS for Mac, but now obviously VS Code. If you're working on Linux, we've got support there as well. And then you can pick from your choice of IDE. So we've got components that build into Visual Studio, VS Code, and work with Rider as well. But beyond that, the reason why Uno is called the Uno platform is that it's not just about the core technology. We also have building blocks that sit on top of that because we recognize that the process of building apps is more than just cutting code. It's taking designs all the way through to actually publishing your application. So the idea is that we're now building abstractions and layers that sit on top of that to help you, get through that app development process as quickly as possible, while still maintaining high quality applications. So on the right-hand side, we've got options in terms of what markup technology you want to use. So if you want to stick in XAML, because that's where the heritage of sort of Windows developments come from, you can do that. If you prefer to stay in C#, then you can do that as well. Got a couple of different technologies in terms of state management. So if you've built apps before, you'll be familiar with how you track state in terms of each page, the content that's on the page, the data that's within your application and how that flows through back to the server. So a couple of different technologies there. And then on top of all of this, we then have a bunch of modules and components that you can then use to actually build out your application. So, we have a toolkit that has a number of additional components that make it, that optimize things for mobile. We have a number of extensions. So if you've worked with the Microsoft extensions, if you build server-side components, you'll be familiar with the Microsoft extensions for logging, dependency injection, those types of things. We have those for the Uno platform as well. And then in the design side of things, we have Uno themes. And the idea there is that you can reskin your application, whether you choose to use the material design language, Fluent, or Cupertino. You can basically pick from your choice of design system to actually apply that to your application. So the idea is it's designed to be modular, and at the end of the day, if you have your own technology, we're working in .NET, right? So if you have your own library that you want to bring, go for it. It'll work. And so you can bring in whatever you want to do. Okay, we have a number of customers across a range of technologies and different industries. And so this kind of gives us the grounding to talk about design and to come from it with an element of experience in terms of, okay, we've been through this process with a number of applications. And so we know, what designers are expecting, we know what developers are expecting, and the two very, very, very rarely are the same, okay? And this goes down to the way that actually designers think about things and the way and the tooling. And if you spend some time in Figma, you'll know that auto layout works a certain way. And then if you come from the developer space, you'll know that things like XAML and stuff like that work a different way. And the two don't necessarily see eye to eye. And so that's half the challenge here, is that when you get an export out of Figma and you put it into XAML, all of a sudden, a margin in XAML is actually the reverse of what, the way the padding and stuff like that works in Figma, right? So that becomes a bit of a challenge, particularly where developers go, I know this stuff inside out. Dropping them into Figma and they all of a sudden go, okay, I'm not sure what the designer was actually thinking here. And so that's part of the challenge, is that we have this handoff problem between designers and developers. And quite often it's a massive chasm. It's a matter of designer finishes the design, they send an email with an attached PDF and goes, here's the design, please implement. And the developer goes, okay, that looks fine. Now I'm going to go ahead and do that. And all of a sudden they end up with something that doesn't scale properly, or doesn't, have the right components, the right font size, those types of things. So this massive handoff problem where designers don't provide necessarily what the developers are expecting. And it's not because the two are any better or worse at their jobs, they're just different. And so, designers that have a focus area of making sure that things are pixel perfect, that things are aligned. Developers have a process where they make sure that the things are functionally correct in terms of, is it the right data on the screen? And the two very rarely are the same, okay? Developers very rarely think, okay, well, that margin's important to make sure that everything's aligned. Whereas a designer will come to it and go, that's not right, that's not what I specified. And so if we can put tooling into place to actually alleviate that problem, then we're one step closer to having a success and eliminating that sort of chasm. On the other end of the spectrum, we actually have a number of tools like the power apps and things like that that are very prescriptive in terms of the way that design's done. So they kind of limit the amount of design and creativity that you can do in order to make sure that we can ship applications really quickly, okay? And so we're trying to get away from that end of the spectrum as well. And so the idea there is that we have the sort of components and technology that sit in the middle that help that handover process. And what's really interesting is if you look at the Figma space over the last year or so, there's an increased focus to actually support this mode, this handoff. And so we've seen things like dev mode appear. We're seeing a number of design systems that actually have, pre-built libraries coming from, Google and Microsoft, and even Apple's got one now in terms of their human interaction design. And so they recognize that this is a problem. They recognize that the way to deal with it is to have these design systems implemented in Figma to not only help designers, jumpstart their app, design, but also to help that handover process to developers. So in the Uno space, we essentially have two components or two parts to the Figma support. We have a component library, and at the moment that's limited to material, so it's a material toolkit. And then we have a plugin that sits into Figma, and the plugin there is actually an Uno app, and I'll show you that as we go through the demo. It's a WASM component that basically sits inside Figma, but allows us to do some fairly creative things in terms of previewing what your design would look like as a running application without you having to leave Figma. So there's some quite interesting things there. And then because we're exporting what's in Figma into the running app, we can then give you the XAML or the C# markup that you can then take and actually drop it into your code. And so we'll see that as part of the demo. And we've got support for various parts of the Uno platform that I spoke about. So things like support for navigation, extensions, and reactive and stuff like that, all from within Figma. Okay, the idea here is that we're basically trying to accelerate two parts here. So on the left-hand side, we've got this material toolkit. The idea there is that it's hopefully a faithful representation of the material design language. And I say hopefully because material keeps on changing what they mean and adding things. And so, there's an ongoing process of making sure that our component toolkit is updated to the latest support from material. But the idea there is that there are components and templates that you can then take and actually as part of your design, you can rapidly pull those together to basically reduce the amount of time that you spend actually coming up with design. Because the last thing you want to do when you're starting out building an app and go, I need to recreate a button in Figma. And it's like, well, hang on, we've done this 1,000 times before. There are versions of that for Fluent and Material and Cupertino. Why can't I just drag those in and start using them in my application? And the idea there is that you can. So we're looking at cutting down the amount of time we're spending on design, but then also the amount of time that in development we're spending actually doing the UI. Now, in all of the apps that I've spent time building, the UI is fundamentally the hardest part of building front-end applications. I don't care what people tell you about, offline support, connecting to services and stuff like that. Nothing compares to the pixel pushing that goes into actually making sure an app works, particularly if it's cross-platform. And things have come a long way in the last 5 years. When we first started down this road, when sort of Xamarin was a new beast in the .NET space, things were really hard. But with Xamarin Forms, Maui, and now Uno platform, we're now getting to a state where that process is getting a lot smoother. Okay, so I spoke about these two components. So the Uno platform material toolkit is essentially the coming together of the Uno platform with a material toolkit for Figma. And I say it that way because there are a number of other material toolkits that are available for Figma. So, I think Google's got one, and then there are other people who have come into Figma and gone, okay, well, we've got this material design language. We're going to implement it in Figma, come up with components and colors and themes and all of that stuff within Figma that we can then use to basically jumpstart our designs. So Uno platform has a version of that. It's called our Material Toolkit. And it's specifically designed so that we can export to the Uno platform. Okay, so we have components in there that will be familiar if you're used to, working with material, and so the naming of colors and brushes and stuff like that will be very familiar. But if you're also familiar with the Uno platform, so from a developer perspective, you'll see things like, oh, it's a text box. Okay, well that makes sense because that aligns to what I'm expecting to see in terms of my application. So the idea there is that it's the coming together of these two things, and this brings us to the first point there, which is about consistency and efficiency. So the designers are talking about the same components because we have a standard toolkit. They're pulling in a text box, and that text box translates exactly to what the developers are expecting the other end. Okay, and there's a number of other components that translate like that. It is about cross-disciplinary collaboration. So the idea there is that we're all talking a common design language as such. And so, developers will open up the Figma file. They use the plugin to basically grab the XAML and the C# markup and actually drop it into their application. It is a free resource, and yes, it's a great starting point for building out your application. It is, as I mentioned, a faithful representation of the Material 3 design language. It does evolve over time, so there are new versions of the Material Toolkit that we do publish. It's available in the community for anyone who's using Figma. It has a series of components and templates, and you'll see those as we get into the demo. It does support light and dark themes, so you can basically switch and actually see that the colors translate correctly. Has a bunch of text styles, hundreds of icons, and you'll see this, there's literally pages of them. The idea there is that you shouldn't have to go hunting for icons. You can basically just pull them up and use them within your application. And then there's obviously documentation. And it comes with an example app so that you're not dealing with just a blank app, look at a blank screen and not knowing where to start. On the Figma plugin side, it is a regular Figma plugin. It just happens to be built as a WASM application using the Uno platform. And we do this for a number of reasons, not the least of which is so that we can do this live preview. And so essentially what's happening is that we're taking your Figma design, we're extracting it as XAML, and then we're actually launching it into the Figma plugin and actually showing you a live representation of what your application will look like. So you can be pretty certain that, at least in the web version of it, it'll look exactly like you're seeing actually in Figma. Does support C# markup and XAML. C# markup's a relatively new thing, and the idea with the Uno platform's C# markup is that it aligns pretty closely with what you'd expect if you're coming from the XAML world. Okay, so the layout there, it is designed to be a very declarative way of representing your application. So it's not a create new text block, add it to the grid, that type of thing. It's basically a very fluent representation of that. But the idea is that the Figma plugin can export those. There's various documentation, one click to export, which we'll see in the demo. It does make heavily use of auto layout. So if you're used to Figma and the auto layout capability there, what it will actually generate is that we have an auto layout component that exists in the Uno world. And so rather than using grids and stack panels, we actually use an auto layout. And that means that we have very close alignment with what we're expecting out of Figma. It is dev mode ready, so basically if you're using dev mode, the Figma plugin will actually appear in the dev mode. If you're not using dev mode, it will just appear as a regular plugin. And then there is support for VS Code as well. Okay, I think we've talked enough. Let's just go and have a look at some demos. So if we go to the community tab in Figma, so for those who haven't seen Figma before, this is Figma. And the globe in the top right, left-hand corner indicates we're on the community tab. This is the Uno platform page. You notice that there are a number of different pages or Figma files that you can grab. These represent a number of the sample applications we already have. So you can go ahead and grab the Tube Player workshop. We have an online workshop that you can step through to actually build out your application. We also have that as a sample in the Uno sample repository, and the two aligned so that you can actually see an existing application that's actually been built with it. That's the same true of Simple Calc and the other two there as well. The one that we're going to be interested in is this material toolkit. So if you're getting started, this is where you start, and we'll go ahead and open this in Figma. We'll grab a local copy to my drafts. And so I don't confuse it with something else later, I'm just going to call this NDC. And over on the left-hand side, you'll notice that there are a number of existing pages. Don't go and delete these because they're kind of important, or at least some of them are. So this is the example app. If you don't want this in the future, you can get rid of that. The getting started documentation is quite useful just as a walkthrough to get yourself familiar with the file. Again, if you want, you can delete that. The next three don't delete, okay, because they're really important. So they represent sort of, if you think of sort of the atomic design sort of systems, you'll think of atoms, so that's the theme, so basically colors and fonts and things like that. And then you step up to sort of modules and molecules, I think, through the components and templates. So those get progressively bigger in terms of the sort of the components that we're talking about. So components would be your buttons and your text blocks and things like that. And then your templates are things like card designs and stuff like that. And then the last four are basically documentation for this file. So things like, you know, the change log as we evolve it over time. So let's jump into this. So this is the example app that we land you on. Probably the best place to start is actually on the themes page, and we'll zoom into this and take a look at it. Oh. Okay, so we'll start off with colors. And as you can see here, you know, there are a lot of colors. And if you've gone and looked through the Material 3 design language, you'll see that there are a lot of colors all defined here. I will zoom into them so you can see them. Okay, so they are primary color, inverse primary color, etc. And these represent, if you think of components like a button, those represent the various layers that you have within a button. So, you know, the standard thing would be your button fill, and then on top of that you have text. And so those are going to be the inverse colors of each other so that you can see them. And they're typically represented by these primary colors and on primary colors as being one on top of the other. You can go and modify these. So if I go and click on one of these, you can bring it up over here and you can go edit, and I can go and change this color and pick on this, and we'll just drag it over here. And what you can see is that this is going to change a number of things. Okay, you can see it here. If I zoom out, and you can see it in the preview. Because Figma basically launched, we've gone and modified a style. Basically, that's been applied everywhere that style is in use in the Figma file. So one thing to be mindful, though, is that because we've modified that one color, you'll see that now we have a bunch of other colors that we really need to go and modify as well. And there are literally hundreds of those. So I would avoid going and modifying individual colors. And I'll show you a trick for how you would update colors in a minute. Let me just also switch to the example app, and you'll see that those colors have been applied there as well. Okay, so you can see that across the board. So I mentioned there was a better way. So I'm just going to undo that color change. And what we're going to do is come up here to the sample app. And on the first page of the sample app, you'll actually see that there's this thing called try it. And this is essentially a set of instructions to go and get the plugin. So we'll go ahead and do that. So from the resources over here, we'll go to plugins. And I've already searched for it, so I'll just grab the Uno platform there, and you'll see that the plugin appears. And we'll go through the other tabs of this in a little bit. I want to go to properties, and one thing we can do here is actually import DSP theme. Okay, DSP is basically a format for importing an entire theme. So we'll go to Material Theme Builder. So I've already got it open here. And I've slightly customized a color. In fact, I've come up with probably what would be an atrocious choice of color, but we're going to export it anyhow. So we'll go here. So if you do want to come up with a new theme, or you want to adjust colors, this is where you would do it, because you can do things like on the left-hand side, you can basically just modify the primary color, and it will flow through and adjust opacities and all of that stuff to make sure that you have a full suite of colors that are associated with it. So when you go to export and you do export to DSP, it will give you the updated colors for all of the different brushes that you need. So we can go ahead and import that now. And click open on that, confirm that I'm going to overwrite my theme. Success. And if I zoom, I'll close this for a second. If I now zoom out, you'll see that that's not only updated our sample app, but if I come down to themes, you'll see, unlike changing that one color, it's actually changed all of the colors to be very consistent, right? So we're not going to run into accessibility problems where there are very similar colors laid on top of each other. Okay, so that's colors. If I scroll over here, this preview window is quite useful because it gives you a good spectrum of colors and typography and things like that. So as you go and modify things, it's worth coming back to this preview, even if you don't have the sample app, to actually see how things are changing. Typography, again, you can go and change these individual ones here. You can either click on this individual one here and go to and actually start modifying it like this. Or you can actually do it anywhere that style has been used. So for example, I can come into here, click on the bit of text here, and over here we've got the style for the font. I can click on that and go modify, and I can actually modify it. Because I'm modifying a style, it's actually going to apply it everywhere where that style is used, even though I'm editing that one particular area there. So if I go and modify that to say 55, you'll notice that that has increased in size, but also over here, it's also increased the size in terms of the panel here. Be careful modifying the font sizes because they will be applied everywhere that style is used, which means that all of a sudden the designs and layouts, your various components might have to be adjusted as well. Again, I would avoid adjusting the individual sizes. I would just pick a different font style to use in most cases. Okay, so I'm going to undo that because I don't know what else I would have broken by changing that. As we scroll across here, there's other panels in here. Most of these are essentially for show. They're there so that you can see the full list of icons that are available, so you can scroll them. Generally, you won't want to be scrolling through that. You can basically, when you're going to actually use an icon, which you'll see later, you can actually search by name. And so, things like, the heart is called a favorite and stuff like that, as you'd imagine. Elevation is kind of the same. They're designed, if I scroll in here, you can see that they're designed as sort of the shadow. It's not really coming across on the projector. Let's see if I can scroll a little bit more so you can see it. Again, it's not coming out particularly clearly, but these are designed to give you that sort of drop shadow behavior. And as you increase the amount of elevation there, you get bigger and bigger drop shadows. You can modify them here. Again, I would suggest that in most cases, what you actually want to be doing is in your design, actually adjust which of the elevations you want to pick rather than modifying them here. So this is kind of like for show, this area here. Okay, as we go across here, app icons is another interesting one. If you've ever gone through the process of publishing an app, part of the challenge there is to make sure you have all of the different apps, particularly if you're going to do all of the different platforms, iOS, Android, Windows are the main painful ones. Windows has something like 54 or more different icon sizes that it supports. So it's a real pain to have to go and create all of those manually. An interesting side story, we worked with a company a number of years ago, back in the Windows 8 timeframe. Most companies we were dealing with back then would give us a single file, like an SVG or something like that, and we would just generate all of the different assets, just doing a regular export. In fact, I think Visual Studio had a thing where you could basically drop in the file and it would generate all of them. And this company basically took one look at the generated ones and goes, nope, 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 nope. And their designer meticulously went through every single one of them and generated them. And it was interesting because you don't really think about it much, but when you actually see it in the app, you actually notice the difference between ones that's auto-generated and one that designers came up with, to the point where the splash screen, we had enabled cache mode for the splash screen, and what that does is basically takes a bitmap image of the splash screen for performance reasons and just throws it up there. And within days they basically messaged us and basically said, nope. Because it's not pixel perfect. On high definition screen, you can see the blurring. It's just like, really? You can tell I'm not a designer, right? Anyway, so that was an interesting side effect. The upshot here is that, you can drop in an SVG and it will generate the icons here. If you select the entire page from the generator thing and do Control-Shift-E, you can then export all of those app icons and then just drop them into your application. If you're working with the Uno platform, you don't need to do most of that. You can actually just take the raw SVGs for the foreground and background, drop them into the app, set them as the app icon, and we have a thing called Resizetizer, which basically goes and generates the corresponding app icons for all of the different platforms you need. The last panel here is for images, and think of this as sort of like a resources area where you can basically icon or images that you're going to use in a number of places in your app. You can put them into here, create them as components, and then you can basically create instances of them throughout your application. The advantage of doing them that way versus just dropping an image into a different page into the app is that if you ever want to change that image, so for example, this logo here, if I ever wanted to change that, I could change it in one spot here, and it's going to change it everywhere I then use that within my application. Okay, so you don't need to do this with every image, but images that you think might change, you can make them components and then change them from there. Okay, so that's the theme. So you can think of this as sort of the atomic level of things. The next step up is our components, and you'll see here that there is a big long list of them. Probably is not very coming through particularly clearly, but let me just zoom into the beginning here. I seem to have lost my index. Okay, so there's an index at the beginning here, and it basically walks you through the various components that are available. So for basic things like basic input. Alternatively, you can then scroll across them across here. So if we get to basic input, you'll see that there are logical things like buttons. And what you'll see here is that you have the first editable template, and then you have a list of all of the possible variants. Okay, so press down, hover over, all of those types of things, all of the combinations that you'd have for the buttons. The idea here is that you can see how that button's going to look in all of those states. You can then put them into the various pages in your app, and you can actually set the variant style so that you can see what it's going to look like in that page. The thing to note is that these variants, when you go to export them, you'll get a button. It doesn't matter whether you've set that button to be in the press state on your page. When you get it exported out from the Figma plugin, you will get a button. Okay, so it doesn't matter which variant you pick, you'll end up with a button that comes out the other end. And as we go across here, you'll see that there are things like the floating action button that's coming from material. There's various things around icons and toggles, switches and checkboxes, and we get into things like text boxes and stuff like that as we go across. I'm not going to go through all of those because there's just like a lot of different variants that we'll start to use. If we go to the next page, we're talking about templates. So we have a number of things for page templates. We'll use those in a minute. And then we get into things like cards that we can then use. So we have a card template that basically is really nice to use in a list because you can basically toggle various components on and off rather than having to come up with a style every time yourself. And so there's some basic templates for lists and swipe controls, etc. as we go through there. Okay, enough talking about these various components. Let's actually just create a new page and walk through a couple of demos of how to build actually a page. So we're going to do two different samples. The first one we're going to do is a dating app, which we saw in the slides. And then we're going to do the tube player example as well. Now, rather than me trying to remember what was in the slides, I'm going to switch back to the slides, which is here. I'm then going to go back up here, and I'm actually just going to crop out this so that I know what type of design I'm going to be going for. And I'm going to go back to Figma, just drop it in here. Okay, so that's the design that we want to come up with. Okay, and so what we're going to do is we're going to start over here on the Assets tab, and we're going to come down here, and we're going to grab the page template. We're going to drag that across, and you'll notice that this comes with a number of sort of pre-styled components. With some placeholder stuff that is in the middle, that is the area where we're going to be doing our main design. So you can see over on the right-hand side, there's various toggle switches for actually controlling this page template. So I can do things like toggle the app bar at the top and the navigation bar at the bottom, get rid of those. Once I've got the page to a state where I then want to start designing it, I can basically come across here and actually detach this from the main design. Now I'm actually going to give this a name. I'm going to say this is my main page. And I'm going to go ahead and detach this instance. Okay, essentially that means I'm detached from the main component. It means I can go and change it to my heart's content without breaking anything else. So most of this placeholder stuff I don't really need. So I'm going to come into here, select them. Let me just break into there. Select those and delete them. Okay, and we're going to start at the very top, and I'm going to build out some, but not all of this. Okay, so the first part is this image. Now, I'm thinking that this may be a component that I want to use elsewhere. So let's just go back to the images library that we had over here. And we're going to go ahead and add the image into here. So I'll go place an image. And I'll grab that profile pic in here. And we'll grab it there. And the first thing, and what I'm going to do is basically wrap this in a frame. So I frame that. And then I'm going to create that as a component. Okay, and I'll give it a name. So this is my hero image. And so now when I come back to my dating app that I was creating, I can come into here, go to my assets, and I go hero image. And I can grab this across. Oop, that was not what I intended to do. Let's go back to my assets for a second. And go back to theme and undo what I just did, because clearly I set something wrong as when I created that component. Okay, so let's just double check that. Okay, so I've got my component there. Let's just not select everything else. Let's just grab that. Frame that selection. Okay, so make sure my frame only got the image in it, which is correct. Okay, and let's go and create the component for that. Create that as a hero image. Go back to our dating app and grab that across. Anytime today. Right, that's what we want to do. Okay, so we're going to set that to fill the container. And we're going to do some cropping on this. So we're basically going to set this to 40 and 40. Okay, and if I clip that, you'll start to see the rounded corners. Okay, so we're starting to take that image and make it look like it's supposed to be in the app. The next thing we're going to do is we want to grab a couple of those buttons. So we want to grab the fab component. So I'll grab a couple of those. And you'll notice that because we've got an auto layout, as I drag them in, they're basically adding them to a vertical list, which is not correct because I want them to be in a horizontal list. We'll deal with that in a second. But before we get into that, I'm just going to style these to make them look closer to what we want here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is come into each of these, and grab the image in the middle, and I'm going to change this click on the icon on the left. And we're going to change this add to, what do we want? We want close. It's going to give us the cross. I can do the same for the next one. Okay, so we do, and this was the favorite. And just to be complete, we'll do the last one. Okay, now one of the things I want to change is this middle one is actually supposed to be enlarged. So you'll see over here we can actually change the default to be the large style here. Okay, so these are starting to look correct, although that's not supposed to be a plus. Why is that still a plus? Let's try that again. Let's go favorite, change that. And we're still in the wrong orientation. So what we'll do is we'll actually go ahead and grab these three buttons. So we'll grab all three of those, and we're going to frame those. And because we framed them, we can basically go ahead and change the auto layout. We'll add an auto layout to that. And we're going to change those to horizontal. We'll also change the alignment so that they're centered. And we'll also notice that these buttons actually don't look quite like these ones. They haven't got the right curvature. So let's just go and modify these just to change the corner radius. So we put change those to 28 and 28. And then the middle one we'll just change to, I think it's 48 will do. Okay, we're getting there. It's still not quite right. So let's just move this to fill the container. So we're centering that. And in order to get its position correctly, we'll basically group the hero image and this frame. We'll frame that, and again, give it an auto layout. And what that means is that we can basically set this to the margin between them to align them in the center. Okay, so we're looking pretty close here. I can go ahead and tweak things like colors and stuff like that, but actually what I want to show you is actually how we can then take this and actually apply it into an actual application. So I'm going to pop open the plugin, and the first thing I want to do is actually click on this refresh button, and what that will do is it will take what we've done in Figma, it'll convert it in essentially to XAML and then have it run within the application, right? So you see actually when I click on this in here, these buttons are behaving like a button because this is actually a page within the application, right? So it's actually, what you'll see here sometimes is that the designs that you've done in Figma don't always come out exactly how you want them into the app, and that gives you the ability to then go and tweak them without having to actually go and put it into a running app. So this tool is particularly important for that. We can then come to the next tab, and you'll notice here that we've already got the XAML that we're expecting or that we can use for this page. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. We'll use that in just 1 minute in Visual Studio. So with that in mind, I'm going to come across to Visual Studio, and we're going to create a new project. Okay, so we're going to pick the Uno platform application, click Next. And what this is going to do is this is going to launch the Uno platform template wizard. So it gives us the ability to basically pick between two sort of pre-canned options, or we can go ahead and customize. So I'll start with the blank one, because this is basically the sort of the minimal set of components. If you want to go down the recommended path, basically it gives you a good starting point for building out an application with all our sort of recommended best practices. Either way, I would suggest going through the customized process because it gives you a good idea of all of the componentry that's available and all of the options that are available. I'm going to skip over most of these. We're going to come down to theme and pick material, and we're going to enable DSP import because that import that I did into Figma for the DSP file, I need to do that in my running app. Otherwise, I'm going to get the standard material colors. And so we're going to need to do that. Under features, I'm going to enable the toolkit because that gives us things like the navigation bar that we're going to want. And then I'm going to go ahead and click create. And so this is going to go ahead and use the .NET New template that sits behind all of this to actually initialize a new application and launch it within Visual Studio. So you'll see that it takes a second or two. And what we'll see on the right-hand side in the Solution Explorer is that we'll see projects being created for all of the target platforms that the Uno platform supports. Well, the ones that we picked actually in the template wizard. If you've come from the Maui space, Maui basically has a single project that it uses for all of its targets. Because Uno has other targets in addition to the standard iOS, Android, and Windows, we also have other projects for those. So you'll see that there's a GTK project, there's a WASM project. There is a long-term goal of actually merging these all into a single project. We're just not quite there yet. So right now we do have different targets for those different platforms. So let's go ahead and actually run this. I'll actually pick let's pick the mobile sample. We'll set that as the startup project. And we'll go ahead and run that on our emulator, which I think I already have running. Now, this does take a second or two to run. While we're doing that, what I'm going to do is come back to actually into Figma, because one thing I will need to do is make sure that the XAML that I'm going to export has the same classes and namespaces that my running application is going to use. So you can see that this app's called Uno App 1. If I come back to Figma, one of the things we can do under properties, I can come in here and under application, I can basically adjust the application-wide namespace. So if I look at the XAML, it's kind of hard to find it along this top line because it's one long line of attributes. But as we go across here, you'll see eventually, this is currently called NDC, which is the name of the document, which is probably not what I want. So if I come here and go, okay, this is going to be my Uno App 1, which will be our default namespace, I can come back here and go refresh, and that's going to then use that Uno App 1 as that main namespace. It's also picked up the fact that I've called this page main page, so the XAML here, the class name will be Uno App 1.mainPage, which is kind of what we want. Okay, let's copy that. My application, I think, is still built. It was built successfully. Why did it not run? Let's just go ahead and run that. We have a slight bug in our template that means that the mobile target is not being marked for deployment right now. So you need to set that in configuration management, but hopefully now it'll actually deploy it to the emulator and actually go ahead and run it. And so whilst it's doing that, I'm going to find the right page where we're going to drop our XAML. So this is the default XAML you get for the main page. So it basically just has a text block in the center of the page. We'll just wait for that to come up. Okay, and there's our page rendered. Now I'm just going to double check that hot reload is actually working. And as I update my application, it should push that out as changes to the running application, he says. Let's see whether it's going to do that or not. We had a number of updates from Microsoft come out yesterday, and sometimes it breaks the initial build of the tooling. Okay, so hot reload is not going to work. So I'm going to basically stop the application, paste in the change that we've got here, and rather than wait for the mobile app to run this time, I'm actually going to pick the GTK target because I know that that runs a lot quicker, and we'll go ahead and run that. And you should see that the updated design that we had will now apply. And you'll have to take my word for it that it would have worked in the mobile app. All right, so interesting. We haven't got the image that we were expecting. Now, remember I said that the images, we're adding them to Figma. You also need to add those corresponding images because they don't get included in the XAML export. They don't render particularly well in XAML. But luckily, we can go ahead and really easily add those into our application. So if I come down to here under Assets, I can go add existing item, and I can go to my Downloads file folder, and grab that same profile pic and add that into there. And then the only change I need to make is actually in my XAML, I need to give it the name of that asset rather than some random image. So I'll do that, and we'll go ahead and run it. So one thing about the structure here is if you haven't seen Uno before, basically it was broken into target platforms, and then the main application is contained in that one spot. That was cute. Let me just rebuild that. So over here, we basically have our main application here. I should be able to go rebuild on that. And then we've got the various target platforms. So if I'm making changes here and adding an image, because I'm referencing it in XAML, it's a relative path to the image, not an absolute path, although an absolute path will work as well. Yeah, there we go, the right image. Okay, so we're along the way with that particular example, and I can go ahead and add in the various components that were part of that design and continue working on that. However, rather than give you more of the same of what you've just seen, we're going to pick a different application and actually start to look at how we can combine some data into this. Because right now we've just got some very static designs where we're essentially building up things up from scratch, which is probably not the most effective way of doing things either. So let's go and add another page, and this is going to be our tube player app. And we're going to start it off pretty much the same way. We're going to come back to our PowerPoint, and so that I know what I'm building, I'm going to basically zoom out on this and grab a screenshot and come back to my Figma file, drop that in here, he says. Okay. And so this is the page that we're going to be building. Let's come down to our page templates again, down here, grab that across here. Let me just lay that out a little bit. And this time we're going to basically leave these various components because I actually do want to make use of the navigation bar in this particular example. And so we're just going to go ahead and name this page main page again, even though it's in a different page in Figma, so it should be named it can be named the same as the previous page that we were working on, which is fine. And again, we're going to go and detach that instance. Okay, so now we can go and start to modify things. Just so you know, even though I've now detached it, I can still remove things like this bottom tab bar. So for example, I can come in here and say, okay, well, I don't actually want that, so I can just go ahead and hide that. I also noticed that my navigation bar has got more stuff than I need here. So the navigation bar here is literally just this icon or this image that's in here. So I can go ahead and remove things like this leading button. I don't need that. And so the content I want to change to be an image. And if I click on the image, I can basically just go ahead and say, okay, well, let's go and change the actual image there. So pick on the image like so. I can go in here and pick the Uno logo. And so now it's kind of looking right, but let's just go and change the layout on that container a little bit. Okay, so that's starting to look right. Now let's go and add some functional components. So of course we want our text box to do the search. So I'll grab that across. I'll put it at the bottom here, but more importantly, we need to go and remove these existing sections like so. If I look at the design, then chances are this search box isn't designed to scroll with the rest of this content. Currently, it's sitting inside this scrollable container. So I'm going to move that text box just above here so that it doesn't scroll. Come on. It's not going to play ball with me. There we go. Okay, and we need to style it so that it looks a little bit more like this search box. So we'll go, okay, fill the container, so it's the appropriate width. We'll increase this, the curvature on the side there. We'll go ahead and say, okay, we do want the label. Okay, we'll change that to just search. We do want the leading icon, but we don't want a mail icon. We want the search icon. So again, we'll pick that. So we're looking kind of right now. It's not quite padded correctly, so let's just go and add that to a frame so that we can add some padding to it. And let me just set the auto layout on that as well. Set that to 8. Okay, so now we've got some indentation. And so now we've got basically this main area that we then need to populate. So for that, we're going to make use of one of the existing card styles that we have. So there's a card details design that we can bring across. And we're just going to drop that into the container as it is. We'll basically sell it to fill a container widthwise. But this has got a whole bunch of stuff that we really just don't need. Okay, so most of this we can control via the properties on this component. So I can go and say, okay, well, I don't need the header. I do want the image. The body I do want, but I don't want that level of detail. And I want the card to be elevated. Okay, so let's just go to our layers and we'll drill down into this area in here. And so if I pick from the template here, I can go ahead and say what I do and don't want as part of this list item. Okay, so I don't need these primary or secondary buttons. The text is looking right, but I'm also missing that leading icon or leading image. So I toggle the leading switch, so that gives me the image. The lines are correct, but there's 3 instead of 2, so I'll just do that. There's also more text here than or more lines of text than I want. I don't kind of want this to be expanding with the amount of text that's going to be displayed. So I'll actually come into here and try and modify this. Let me just double check in there. So let's limit it to 1 or 2 lines. And with those selected, I'm just going to basically force these to be both fixed height as such, which will limit the amount of text that we get displayed there. So now kind of our design's looking mostly right. Of course, we haven't actually got images in there, but we'll fix that in a minute. In order to do that, and actually to preview it, we'll actually come back into the plugin and and let's have a quick look at what that's going to look like. So plugin, open the plugin, and we'll go to our preview page and I'll hit refresh. I need to basically select an area. Let's go refresh on that. Okay, so that's looking almost exactly like it does in Figma, but not what I was kind of expecting my app to look like, because for an app, I'd kind of want that to be populated with a list of items. Okay, so one of the features that we actually have in here is that we can provide it a JSON data structure. Okay, so this would be what you would kind of align to the object model that you'd have when you're going to be data binding. And so rather than type this out, I do have a pre-canned one here that I'm going to copy across. Okay, so this is literally a JSON structure. You could think of this as basically the structure that you get back from a web request, or it could be just a serialization of an object graph that you have in your app. If you copy this in here, don't do my mistake that I did a couple of times and not save this. So once you've saved it, you can then come back into the running app and start to data bind things. Now, we haven't dealt with any data binding yet, so right now, even if I came back into here and hit refresh, it would still look the same. So what we want to do, though, is actually come to each of these individual components and start to data bind these up to the data structure that we have. In our data structure, we have a search term, and then we have a series of search results so that you can see that this is an array of objects. And so what we can do in here is we've got our text box selected. We'll come into here, and under content, we'll actually data bind this to search term. And so now if I come back to here and click refresh, you'll actually see that in the running app, this is now data bound to the value that was coming from our data context. We'll do the same for search results and data bind to things like we want the channel thumbnail, which is just here. We want the title and description of the details, along with the image for the structure there. So we can data bind all of those individual ones. Because this is supposed to be a list, if we select on the scrollable item, come to our properties, under here for the type, we basically need to define the type of structure that we want essentially to export as, but also in the running app. So we'll pick a list view because that's one of the common structures. And for our content, we basically need to data bind it to the property that's going to define the list of items. So in this case, it was the video search results. Like so. Okay, so let's come back here and actually hit refresh on that. And so now we're getting a series of items, but those items aren't actually populated with anything. We've just got the right number of items. So again, we'll go through the individual ones of those. So if I pick on the image here, come into the properties here, I'll go, so this is the details, snippet, thumbnails, medium, URL, and you can tell that I've typed it a few times because I remember what it is. And then we'll do the same for this other image. Okay, so this one is basically the same, but instead of being details, it's the channel. For the title, let's go pick on the correct one there. Title, it's the same, but it's not an image, it's just title. And then for the description, I'll drop that in there, and again, this is description. Okay, so that's all looking pretty good. If I hit refresh on this, we should have a thing that looks very close to what our application should look like. So now we're at a point where we can essentially take this and export it. So if I come over here, for this one, we're actually going to use C# markup. Okay, so we'll actually see that we've got it looking pretty good here. The only thing is that this is still called Uno App 1. Okay, I already have my app here. In Visual Studio somewhere, it's called Tube Player. And in actual fact, my main page actually has a sub namespace called Presentation. So if I come back to Figma, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our properties, we'll go click on Application, we're going to change this to Tube Player and put the views in Presentation. Let's just check that again. Yep, that's correct. And that should be pretty good. Now if we come back here and do refresh, our namespace should be pretty much correct. So that's looking pretty good. I'll go ahead and copy that. Come back to our running application. I will actually run this. Again, I'll run it with GTK because I know that this is going to be the quickest to run. Okay, and again, this is just going to give us Hello Uno platform in the top corner. Let's see if like hot reload is going to work. Let's just paste all of that in. So this is C# markup if you haven't seen it before. It is almost a C# equivalent of the XAML. So if you're used to reading XAML, you'll be very familiar and at home with the C# markup. Let's go ahead and save that. And we have our running application. Okay, so clearly this is styled for mobile. Let's just go and search for myself because I'm narcissistic like that. Interesting, the data binding is not being picked up. Let's just try and refresh that, restart. Let's do NDC instead. There we go. Okay, so that's working. Now, ideally, I'd want to be able to click on one of these and go through to the details. Okay, so that's not happening right now. But one of the things I can do is actually come back to Figma, and in our plugin, we actually have the ability to export navigation-based information. Okay, so out of the box, we do have navigation support for various components, and one of those is a list or an items repeater, and the ability to basically, when you click on something, it will include the navigation support to go to a particular item. Now, the trick there is that the thing that the actual card that you have in here needs to be named based on the route that you want in your application. Now, I'm kind of glossing over a lot of the details of how Uno-based navigation works. And so there's an entire documentation online about how it works. What's important is that when I change that and I come to our export here, if I go and hit on refresh, let me just pick my frame again, click on refresh in there. What we should see, let's just zoom this out a little bit, is down here where I've got my list view, you'll actually see that it's added navigation in there, which is interesting because it's not picking up the right navigation path at all there. Let's go and try that. Let's just try that again. For some reason, it's picking up the wrong node for that. Okay, so that's picked up the right route there. I can go ahead and copy that. Let's go back to our running application, drop that into there, hit save, and go back to our actual application. And with a bit of luck, when I click on that, it's now going to take us to the app. Okay, hot reload is really not working for me today. Let's just restart the app. Interesting. Okay, so navigation is not working at all. Let's just check that it did actually put it in there. It did. Okay, that should align to the navigation support. I'm not going to try and spend time debugging that right now. I just wanted to point out in the closing minutes that we also have support for exporting information for reactive extensions. So if you've come across MVUX or reactive extensions, it can export the stuff there. The nice thing there is instead of just having a regular list view, you actually have it wrapped in a feed view, which basically gives you states for when it's loading, error states and those types of things, all of which you can customize in the design and have those flow through to the application. There is also support for exporting information for accessibility and localization. If you've done localization in .NET in the UI space, essentially that just applies to a UID tag to most of the elements, and you'll have a corresponding resource file that has all of the text strings in it. You then translate those to the various different languages that you want to support within your application. So this gives you the ability to export those IDs based on your Figma design. And with that, that's pretty much the demo. Let me just switch back to the slides for a couple of minutes. If you want more information about the stuff that we covered today, there's a Getting Started with Figma link there. There are a couple of different samples and the material toolkit there. Otherwise, we do have a Discord channel dedicated to Uno platform, and the team are fairly responsive there. And with that said, thank you very much, and open to questions from the floor. And I think do you have a microphone? Probably not, just yell it out. It's all good. So yeah, thank you for attending. Hope you got something out of that. If you're interested in the Uno platform or what we're doing in Figma, feel free to come and have a chat. So, thank you. Any questions? No? Stunned silence. Good. Mission accomplished. So, yep. So responsive designs, it is a challenge in Figma because you can only do one page at a time. And so what we're currently in the process of doing is we do have there's a couple of challenges here. Firstly, to do the design, which is fine because you just create multiple instances of the page. And then what you're essentially exporting is the part that's going to be responsive for each of them. The challenge there is having a corresponding component in the Uno platform. Now, of course, you can use things like visual triggers and visual states to actually do all of that responsive design. One of the things that came out in 5.1, which was like a week ago, is we have a thing called a responsive view. Now, I must admit, I haven't played with it, but essentially what it does, it allows you to set sort of staging or trigger points. And so you can basically define, hey, this is what it's going to look like for, portrait. This is what it's going to look like for landscape. And you can set what those trigger points are, like what the width and the height's got to be for those different states. So the idea there is that you can do your Figma design. You can export not the whole page, but just the part that you want to be responsive, and just drop that into the various templates as part of that responsive view. So hopefully that answers that question. Yep.
That it goes to a large desktop all the way to mobile. So that you have families like it wraps and does all of that. I say
No. So if you're doing like auto layout, so like basically letting things wrap and stuff like that, that stuff should just work. So you basically just export it as it is, and it will work. Because those things like will work. So for example, what we saw there was that my designs weren't like the text was scaling properly because like the text is designed to fill the container, but the image was basically doing weird things. It was stretching like incorrectly, right? Because I hadn't spent the time to get that correct. But had I done that, then the whole design would scale as I resized my app. However, in some cases, I mean, both of those examples were really mobile-orientated designs. And so if you think about the two-player example, as you go to a larger screen, you instead of going a vertical list, you probably want to do something like a grid layout for the items or something like that. In that scenario, then you essentially want two different layouts for those different, instead of it just being responsive. I mean, you could probably just do it with responsive, basically update the template to be a grid instead of being a list. But from a Figma perspective, you kind of want that to be two different designs. One which is a vertical list and one which is a grid type layout. And so that was the scenario that the gentleman was asking about is, how do you go from a very mobile orientated something to something that's a full screen desktop? But you're 100% right. If you've got things that are scaling, like designed to scale, that stuff will just work. Yep. Yep. So the short answer is no. But the long answer is there are probably other, because we don't work in React at all. There are probably other templates for Figma that do similar sort of things that are gold around React. So, I mean, in theory, there's no reason why it couldn't be. And in fact, you could actually take the material toolkit that we've got, and if you built a different plugin, you could extract everything that we've got into React. There's no reason why that couldn't happen. So yeah, for sure. And the same's true for any other platform like Flutter or for Angular or for Maui, for example. I mean, all of those could have their own plugin that sits on top of that material toolkit. The only reason that material toolkit is very platform orientated is because it has the same sort of naming conventions for text box and for cards that we actually have from the development perspective, and it aligns with what the components will end up being outputted as. So, yeah. Yep. So did you see when I added the image there? So that was I actually added as a component, and then I started using that. So yes, you can do that. There are some components that you will want to use that you won't want to break from their components. So for example, a text box, because it actually renders as a text box control within the Uno platform, you need to make sure you use the text box template, component, and don't dissociate it from that component. Because as soon as you detach that instance, the plugin doesn't know that that's actually a text box, and so you're just going to get a series of auto layouts. So, yeah. All right, thanks, guys.